This is Dora Tarver of e-projectmanagers.com with another segment in our video tutorials. Today we're going to look at the Risk Management Tools template. It's an Excel file, and when you open it up you'll see something like this on the first worksheet, the form worksheet. Now I added a instructions tab in this worksheet, and I want to first walk you through what's in here. In order to use the risk management tools, you'll need to first do a couple of things. As it says here in the instructions, this form is used to capture risks. And if you've looked at the chair log video tutorial, you understand that we have a log where we track the risks. But in order for those risks to be captured in the log, there's actually a process that you would need to execute in order to get the information needed. And that's what this risk management tools Excel file is all about. So the first thing you'll want to do, as it says here in letter A, is identify the individuals who are the subject matter experts who would be able to think of the risks associated with the project. So on every team you always have your stakeholders who participate in the team. You'll need to identify who is the most knowledgeable, or the combination of people who are the most knowledgeable, and you'll want to get them together for a meeting. Okay, but before we get into that meeting, after you identify those individuals, then what you'll do, as it says here in B, is you'll email the risk form, which is what the first worksheet is here. You'll email them this risk form, and the risk form has an example already filled out, and you'll ask them to complete the form, filling it in and adding additional entry fields if they think of more risk than what is initially in the form. I think the form has 4 placeholders, but if they think of 12, then they'll need to add more placeholders to enter the risks, and I'll show you that in a minute as well. So anyway, you'll email this form, and they'll fill this out, and then they'll email it back to you. And this form is what we use in the risk review session. Okay. Again, when you go to the form, you'll see I've filled out an example in blue text, and of course you'll replace this with black text. And right now, as I scroll through here, there are 4 placeholders, 4 boxes here. They'll need to copy and paste this as many times as necessary in order to add additional information. And that's basically what you would do, is simply reduce the size of this view, copy the cells that you want to copy, hit copy, scroll down a little bit, find some space, maybe a row or 2, I think I'm leaving a row here, and then hit paste. And then you have another set of fields for them to enter information in. If they're not familiar with how to navigate around in Excel, you'll want to do this for them, or explain simply just cut and paste. Explain to them that they'll simply need to cut and paste rows as they need them. Okay, so going back to the instructions, you're going to ask everyone to submit their risks to you prior to the meeting. You're going to need to pinpoint a meeting date that fits within their schedule. Ask them to cut the risks from the individual squares, which I just showed you, and copy them if they need to into additional squares. What's going to happen is, when you receive this form back with their answers filled out, you're going to literally get a pair of scissors and cut these squares. Let's see, my mouse is acting up here. You're going to cut these squares so that I'm just going to highlight this in another color so you'll see. You're going to cut this out for each one. You're going to cut out a square, and you're going to save all of these squares, and I'll explain a little bit what you're going to do with that information. So once they email this back to you, you're going to cut out the information that that we're going to use in our meeting. So that means literally just cutting out the square from the risk column down to the last effect. Here, I'll put a darker border around it so you can see. So basically you cut out these squares here. when they return their analysis results back to you. And you're going to go into a meeting with these squares, and ultimately what's going to happen is you're going to tape the squares up on a plotter onto a big form, which I'm going to show you in a minute how to use. So once you have the risk analysis forms back and you've cut them out, you'll want to schedule a meeting, and it'll probably take about 2 hours. You might need to have multiple sessions depending on the complexity of your project and how many people are involved and how many risks are identified. But you'll schedule your first meeting, and the following meetings will pretty much have a similar format. Basically, as it says here in C, during the meeting you'll facilitate a discussion with the individuals and have everyone review the forms that they submitted. So these little forms, which they're going to be filling out, are going to be reviewed in the meeting. And you may notice that some people submit responses that are very, very, very similar. There may be some overlap, but in the meeting you'll be able to resolve that. What's going to happen is I've created a little paint image here. In your meeting, you're going to have a large plotter image hung up on a wall. And here's a picture of you. And what you're going to do is you're going to take the forms and you're going to place them on that image in the proper location. So for example, if we scroll down here, let me just go back to the Excel file for 1 second here. The forms that you see here, when you cut them out, are going to be little pieces of paper. And in this Risk Management Tools Excel file, there's a print on plotter worksheet. And the way this is set up is it's intended for you to print this on a plotter. It'll probably end up being at least 3 feet by 3 feet, if not larger. Okay, you want it to be really, really big. And what happens is once this plotter tablet is printed out, then in your meeting, if I go back to this image, you then paste the responses, the little squares that you pasted out, that you cut out, you tape them onto the plotter image in the appropriate location. So here you are taping them up here, and this is an example. Let's just say, as in the example on the form worksheet, I filled out something in blue. It says probability of 3, impact 3. Probability of 3, if you roll over probability, it says 50-50 probable, meaning it's a 50-50 chance that it may occur. And the impact for 3 is stop, take a look, could impact us, we would have to catch up. So if the probability was 3 and the impact was 3, then in your session, when you hang this up on the plotter, there's a probability column and an impact row. So if the probability was 3, that would be in this position, and if the impact was 3, this is impact, then you would paste their response in this square. Likewise, if the probability was a 4 and the impact was 5, you would put it in the 4 row for probability and the impact column for 5. Okay, so all of the responses that people give you would be taped up in here, and yes, when you're done, there'd be a lot of information. It's okay to overlap things. You may have multiple items within one square. Most likely you will. But ultimately what happens is when you're done, you'll be able to notice a trend. You'll be able to see a pattern of where issues are in your project. And this will give you a immediate visual indication of risks that you need to be aware of. And sometimes literally laying this out like this is a major eye-opener for people involved in the project, because they can see visually, this project has a lot of risks, and they can see later when you log these in the risk log the details behind each risk. But this process will help tremendously. Now, once you paste all of the forms on this plotter chart, the next step will be to literally sit down and discuss them. So as I said, when people submit them, you may find some duplication. Now let's look at this example. As I mentioned, I filled this in with a 3, 3, and as you can see here on the form, it's divided between different types of responses that you want people to give you. You can modify this form. You can add a row for mitigation strategy if you want to have people not only think of risk, but come up with ways in which they feel would be effective for monitoring and managing that risk. Or you can just leave it as it is now, and then you can come up with mitigation strategies later. But as you see here, this form that they're filling out allows them to enter probability and impact, and then they describe the constraint. What is it due to? So for example, here it says the purchase of hardware. And the next item in this form is in the event of. So in the event of, if what happened, that's what this refers to. If, and then you describe the procurement process is too slow. Okay, this is a trigger event that could happen. What would the effect be? That's what the next row is. Well, in this example, the servers would not be set up in time for performance testing. So this is a risk. You're purchasing hardware, the procurement process may be too slow. The effect is you wouldn't be able to test as you had scheduled. So this is an example. You can see it says constraint due to, that describes what they need to enter in. They have to think from that perspective. The event, if what happens. The effect, then what will you do? And again, as I mentioned, you can add another row for mitigation strategy in terms of how will you prevent this from happening. Calling the procurement office weekly or whatever you need to do. So when you tape this up on the plotter form, what you need to do is walk through each of these and make sure that everyone agrees that the probability is a 3, which in this case is a 50-50 chance of happening. Make sure everyone agrees with the impact, and you get buy-in from your team. You may discover that some discussion occurs, some new thoughts are presented, and the original submitter may say, maybe the probability is less likely, or maybe it's higher. Things may change. But what will happen is in your risk analysis meeting, the people who you've invited will come to a consensus about what will happen and how they value things and perceive the probability impact. And so you'll move things around as needed during the meeting. And at the very end of the meeting, you want to save this board because this is actually going to be put in the chair log, in the risk log of the chair log. Okay. So going back to the instructions, so we're just talking about what's happening during the meeting. It says during the meeting you'll facilitate a discussion where individual forms will be reviewed, and the individuals in the meeting should come to agreement on the probability and impact of the risks. And again, don't be surprised if people create similar risks. However, be aware of risks that contain multiple risks. This is important. Sometimes people will submit what appear on one form a risk that is actually not one risk but 2 or 3. So pay attention to that detail. You'll want to split them out into separate individual risks to manage. So number 2 here talks about the risk log will be filled out by you. That's what I mentioned before. In the chair log, the changes, action items, issues, and risk log, you'll have a worksheet for risks, and you'll need to take the results of this risk analysis that you go through and put that in the risk log. That's what this describes here. Once you've put that information in the risk log, what you need to do is then communicate back to the people who participated in the risk meeting, sharing with them the final output. So as I mentioned here, after you enter them in the log, email the log to the participants and ask for feedback. If everyone agrees that there are no issues and they agree with what's there, then you're on your way to continuing to manage risks. As a note, of course, you may identify other risks during the project lifecycle that did not come up during this risk analysis. Simply enter them into the risk log and proceed with managing them, identifying the mitigation strategy and details to help you maintain control. Point three here mentions about the printing of the plotter. It says on a large 4x4 form. So again, that's this worksheet here. You want it to be really big because you're going to hang this up. It should be about the size of a whiteboard. Because when you paste all these forms that you're going to get back from people, you're going to see it takes up a lot of space. So you'll want to have room to be able to do that. So print this out on a 4x4 form, hang it on the wall. Use tape, so you'll want to bring some Scotch tape or something to be able to stick things up and make sure that you can move them around. And let's see what else here. Oh, well, I already mentioned that this form will help people see the impact that risks have on their project. As I mentioned in this image here, once they see this on a wall, you're in a meeting and there are a bunch of people around here, they can see the probability and the impact, and they can see the scale. One of the things that I also do, by the way, is I'll have the probability and the impact scales written down for everyone to have a copy in front of them, so that when we talk about probability and impact, they can reference the scale, because not everyone typically memorizes this right up front. So that's another minor detail that you want to be aware of. So again, feel free to customize these forms. As I mentioned on the form, you might want to add a row for mitigation strategy, and you might want to encourage your team to not only think of risk, but think of how they'll resolve them. And then you'll take this information and enter it into the chair log. And we already went through the chair log. Let me just go back there just to show you really quickly. This is the risk log, and every item that you identify on that plotter will be placed in here, okay? And then going forward in weekly status meetings, or however often you're meeting, you'll review this form. You'll review the chair log with risks, and you'll update them as you're monitoring them through your project. So this is the risk management tools template. By the way, it does have a little risk log in here, so you can keep this in here, or you can copy it into another document as you're building it. I just put that in there because sometimes people don't necessarily keep everything together in an Excel file. But anyway, this is your toolkit to help you with managing risks. It's completely customizable. I recommend that you save this as your project name, as always, and customize the header and footer with your project name, and then you're good to go. So that's it. This is Dora Tarver from e-projectmanagers.com, wishing you to have an excellent day. Thank you. Bye-bye.